One millionaire pretended to faint to test his fiancée, but only the housekeeper came to his aid, while the fiancée didn't even care. Secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment on where you are watching from. Chapter 1. The Staging. The golden light of the Los Angeles sunset filtered through the panoramic windows of the mansion in Beverly Hills, creating dancing reflections on the baccarat crystals arranged on the dining table. Edward Miller adjusted the knot of his Italian tie for the third time, his dark eyes scanning every detail of the environment with the precision of someone who had built an empire on foundations of distrust. At 52, he had learned that people rarely revealed their true nature when they knew they were being watched. "Tonight, I will discover who you really are, Isabella," he murmured to himself, watching through the tinted glass of his office as his fiancée organized the final details of the engagement party. Isabella Carter moved through the room like a ballerina on her private stage, commanding the waitstaff of the Ivy with elegant gestures and a voice modulated by her elite upbringing. At 38, she embodied the perfection of a Los Angeles socialite, perfectly styled blonde hair, a Valentino dress that hugged her calculated curves, and a smile that never reached her green eyes. Edward observed as she checked the guest list again, her fingers tapping impatiently against the golden clipboard. "Mr. Edward?" The soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Would you like me to arrange the flowers on the main table? I noticed some roses are wilting." Edward turned to find Maria standing in the doorway, a broom in hand and a navy blue apron over her. Uniform. Even after 2 years working in his home, she still surprised him. There was something in her posture, upright, dignified, without the servility he was used to seeing in staff, that piqued his curiosity. "Go ahead, Maria." "Thank you for noticing," he replied, discreetly studying her face. 45 years, marked with the grace of someone who had weathered storms but had not lost her sweetness. Sun-kissed brown skin, brown eyes reflecting an intelligence he suspected was much greater than she let on. "Sir?" Maria hesitated at the door. "Are you all right? You seem worried." It was exactly this perceptiveness that intrigued him. How many times had Isabella noticed when he was concerned? How many times had she even looked his way when there were no cameras or important guests around? "I'm fine, Maria, just thinking about the party." She nodded with a small but genuine smile. "Everything will be all right, sir. You've prepared everything with great care." She paused, as if she was going to say something more, but simply waved and left. Edward closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The plan had been set for weeks. During the main toast, he would simulate a sudden illness. Nothing dramatic, just enough to test the reactions of those present, especially hers, especially Isabella. The sound of high heels on the marble floor announced the arrival of the bride-to-be in the office. Isabella entered without knocking, as she always did, her eyes already on her phone as she spoke. "Love, we need to talk about the gift list. Tiffany called saying that the dinner service we chose is out of stock, but they have an even more expensive option that—" She paused, finally looking up. "Why are you looking at me like that? What do you mean? With that look as if you're analyzing an architectural project. You do that when you're calculating something." Edward smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "I'm just admiring my fiancée. Can't I?" Isabella stepped closer, placing her hands on his shoulders with the familiarity of 2 years of relationship. "Of course you can. But you know it makes me nervous when you get into this investigative businessman mode. Today is our party, love. Our special day." "Our special day," he repeated, watching how she avoided his direct gaze. "Isabella, Can I ask you a question? Sure. Why do you want to marry me? The question came out more directly than he intended. Isabella blinked, her expression wavering for a fraction of a second before she resumed her perfect smile. What kind of question is that? Because I love you, obviously. Edward, you're acting strange today. Don't tell me you have pre-wedding jitters. Maybe. He studied every micro-expression on her face. It's just that sometimes I wonder if you would love me if I were, I don't know, an ordinary engineer or a teacher. Isabella laughed, but the sound came out artificial. What nonsense! You're not a teacher, love. You're Edward Miller, the man who turned vacant lots into entire neighborhoods. That's what makes you special. My money makes me special? Don't be silly. She quickly kissed his forehead. Your ambition, your intelligence, your ability to build incredible things. The money is just a consequence. Edward nodded slowly, but something cold settled in his chest. She hadn't directly denied it. The guests are arriving, Isabella continued, already heading for the door. Put on the navy blue tuxedo. It matches my dress. Oh, and remember to greet Robert Stevens first. He's considering investing in the project in the downtown area. Even at their engagement party, it was always about business. 40 minutes later, the mansion buzzed with the voices of Los Angeles elite. Edward circulated among the groups, exchanging firm handshakes and calculated smiles, but his mind was focused on the plan. With each conversation, he noted how Isabella strategically positioned herself near the most important investors, how her eyes sparkled when discussing numbers, how she possessively touched his arm whenever other women approached. Edward, my dear. The powerful voice of Robert Stevens cut through his observations. What a magnificent party. Isabella has such great taste. Thank you, Robert, she really does. And this property, impressive. It must have cost a fortune. I bought it from a Japanese businessman who was returning to Tokyo, prime location. Robert nodded in approval. Smart investment, properties in Beverly Hills. Only value. Speaking of which, I need to discuss the project in the West End with you. Edward half listened as Robert detailed his thoughts on the investment. His attention was divided between the conversation and the discreet observation of the environment. Mary moved silently among the guests, collecting empty glasses and serving the hors d'oeuvres prepared by the catering service. She moved with an almost invisible efficiency, anticipating needs without interrupting conversations. It was then that Edward saw her stop discreetly behind a pillar, watching an elderly lady who seemed lost near the staircase. In seconds, Mary approached the guest with a warm smile, offering help to find the restroom. The genuine kindness of the gesture contrasted with the calculated atmosphere of the party. So, what do you think? Robert concluded his speech expectantly. Sorry, Robert. Could you repeat the last part? The investor frowned, but patiently repeated his points about timelines and returns. Edward forced himself to concentrate, but his gaze kept drifting to Mary and Isabella, unconsciously comparing their interactions with the guests. At 9:15 in the evening, the moment arrived. Edward positioned himself near the main table, where Isabella was animatedly chatting with 3 wives of businessmen about their planned honeymoon in Paris. He took a deep breath, checked once more that Mary was just a few meters away, organizing tableware on a tray, and executed his plan. Isabella, He brought his hand to his forehead, pretending to feel a sudden dizziness. What's wrong, love? Isabella didn't even turn fully, her eyes still on her friend's. I'm feeling... Edward allowed himself to sway slightly, leaning against the table. Oh, it must be the champagne, one of the women said with a giggle. Men and their tolerances. Edward let himself slide slowly, as if his legs were failing. What happened next etched itself in his memory with crystal clarity. Mary dropped the tray. The sound of glass shattering on the marble echoed through the room and rushed toward him. Isabella, on the other hand, continued chatting, only commenting distractedly. "Someone call Dr. Smith. He should be in the living room." It was Mary's firm and warm hands that supported him, her worried voice whispering, "Mr. Edward, Mr. Edward, please, respond. Did anyone bring water?" And it was in her brown eyes, filled with genuine concern, that Edward saw something he had been searching for years without knowing, someone who cared for him, not for his bank account. The test was complete. The masks had fallen. Now he knew exactly what to do. Chapter 2. Silent Discoveries. Edward remained still for a few seconds longer than necessary, absorbing every detail of the scene around him. Mary's hands trembled slightly as she checked his pulse, her fingers demonstrating a technique that went far beyond basic first aid knowledge. She carefully supported his head, whispering soothing words while asking someone to bring water and loosen his tie. "Take a deep breath, Mr. Edward. Slowly, breathe in through your nose," she instructed in a firm but caring voice. "You're sweating. It might have been a drop in blood pressure." The medical precision of her observations surprised him, but Edward kept his eyes half closed, still pretending to be disoriented. In the background, he heard Isabella explaining to the guests, "He's been working too much. You know how it is. Dr. Smith, I'm so glad you're here. Edward had a sudden episode. The family cardiologist, a burly man in his 70s, approached with the hurry his age allowed. 'Excuse me, my dear,' he said to Mary, who immediately stepped back but remained close, watching attentively. 'Edward, my boy, how are you feeling?' Dr. Smith knelt beside him, starting a quick examination. 'Better now,' Edward murmured, allowing himself to recover gradually. It was strange, a sudden dizziness. 'Your blood pressure seems normal,' the doctor noted after a few minutes. 'But let's do a more thorough check in my office tomorrow. For today, I recommend rest.' While Dr. Smith spoke, Edward noticed that Mary had not returned to her tasks. She stood at a respectful distance, but her eyes never left him, as if she were monitoring his condition. When he tried to get up, it was she who discreetly stepped forward to offer support, even with Dr. Smith and other men present. 'Sir, let me help,' she said softly. 'Stand slowly, you might still be dizzy.' Isabella finally approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. 'Love, you scared me. I was telling the girls about the hotel in Paris when I saw all this commotion. The words echoed in Edward's mind. To her, his discomfort had been a commotion, an inconvenient interruption of the party. 'Maybe we should cancel the rest of the night,' he suggested, testing her reaction. 'Cancel?' Isabella's tone rose an octave. 'Edward, we have 40 guests here. Robert came all the way from Washington, D.C., and the Johnson family cancelled a trip to be here. You're better now, aren't you?' 'I'll stay with you,' Mary offered spontaneously, 'in case you need anything during the party.' 'No need, Mary,' Isabella interrupted quickly. 'You have a lot of work still. Just look at the mess with the broken glassware.' Edward watched, the genuine embarrassment on Mary's face as she remembered the tray she had dropped in her rush to help him. 'I'm sorry, Mr. Edward. I'll replace the glassware. Don't worry.' 'It's nothing,' he replied firmly. 'Accidents happen.' 'Of course, you don't need to replace anything,' Isabella added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. 'But it would be good if you finished serving the hors d'oeuvres before they get cold.' The contrast was striking. Mary had cared about his well-being. Isabella cared about the impression the incident would leave on the guests. 2 hours later, when the last guests were saying goodbye with promises of "what a wonderful party" and "what a scare you gave us," Edward retreated again to his office. The party had been a social success. New contracts had been discussed, important connections reinforced. But the test revealed more than he had expected. Mary appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with chamomile tea and toast. "I thought you might want something light. My grandmother always said that chamomile calms the stomach after a scare." "You didn't have to." "I did." She entered and placed the tray on the side table, her movements efficient, yet careful. "You gave me quite a fright. For a moment I thought—" She paused, as if realizing she was being too informal. "What did you think?" Mary hesitated, then sighed. "I thought it was something serious. Heart attack, stroke. I've seen it happen before." "You've seen it?" "I worked in a hospital for a long time, sir, before I came to Los Angeles." Edward leaned forward, intrigued. "Hospital? Were you a nurse?" Mary's face flushed slightly. "I was. 15 years at the Santa Casa Hospital in Riverside. After my husband passed away and, well, I came to Los Angeles with the kids and my mother. I thought about continuing in the field, but—" She shrugged. "Things didn't go as planned." "And why didn't you tell me this before?" "You didn't ask, sir. Besides, what difference would it make? You needed a housekeeper, not a nurse." Edward studied her face with newfound understanding. The upright posture, the way she moved her hands while checking his pulse, the calmness in stressful situations. It all made sense now. "Mary, can I ask you a personal question?" She nodded, still standing respectfully near the door. "Why is an experienced nurse working as a housekeeper?" The silence that followed was heavy with untold history. Mary looked at her own hands, then back at him. "Because sometimes life forces us to choose between what we want to do and what we need to do to survive," she replied simply. "I needed immediate work when I got here. I had 3 mouths to feed and no time to validate my degree, take new courses, or wait for lengthy interviews. You offered honest work with a fair salary. I accepted." "And don't you miss it, the medical field?" A melancholic smile crossed her face. "Every day, but I don't regret it. My kids are studying, my mother has her medications, and I sleep with a clear conscience knowing that no one here goes hungry." Edward sipped the tea slowly, processing the revelation. "Where do you study at night?" Mary widened her eyes, surprised. "How do you know I study?" "Sometimes I come home late and see you leaving with books." "I'm taking a technical course in administration at Los Angeles Community College," she admitted. 3 times a week after work. I think that, well, maybe one day I can work in a hospital again, but in administration. It's more stable." "And where are your kids during your classes?" "With my mother. She stays with them, helps with homework. Tyler is 16, a good boy, responsible. He takes care of his sister when I need to go out." Edward did some mental calculations. If she worked until 7 in the evening and studied 3 times a week, she probably got home around 11. When did she sleep? When did she have time for herself? "Mary," he said carefully, "why have you never asked me for a letter of recommendation to try to return to the healthcare field?" She looked directly at him for the first time in the conversation. "Because employer and employee each have their place, Mr. Edward. It's not my place to ask for favors beyond my salary." The simplicity of her answer hit him like a punch. Here was a qualified, hard-working and principled woman who had never thought to use her position for advantage, who had never flirted, manipulated, or insinuated, who treated her work, any work, with dignity and responsibility. "And what did you think of the party today?" Mary hesitated again. "It's not my place to give an opinion, sir. I'm asking for your opinion." "It was elegant. Your fiancée is very beautiful." "That's not what I asked." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Mary carefully replied, "People seem to be having fun. And what about my discomfort? What did you think of people's reactions?" Mary's eyes met his for a moment, laden with mutual understanding. She knew. He could see in her eyes that she knew the test had been intentional, but instead of judging him, there was something close to compassion in her expression. "I think," she said slowly, "that you discovered what you needed to know." Edward nodded. "Yes, I did. May I say one thing, Mr. Edward?" "Of course. I don't know why you did that today, but if you're doubting something important, trust your instinct. In my experience, when something doesn't feel right, it usually isn't." Her words resonated in the silence of the office, long after Mary had discreetly withdrawn. Edward remained alone, sipping the tea she had prepared, savouring the genuine care that was present in every gesture. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone, and for the first time since meeting Isabella, he began to seriously question whether he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Chapter 3. Everyday Revelations. The 3 months following the engagement dinner passed like a silent investigation. Edward found himself observing Mary with an attention that went far beyond the employer-employee relationship, discovering layers of complexity he had ignored for 2 years. She arrived promptly at 7 in the morning, always wearing the same impeccably pressed navy blue apron. But now, he noticed details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way she organized her mother's medications in a small pill organizer she carried in her bag. The administration books she studied during breaks when she thought no one was watching. The respectful yet firm way she treated the other staff in the house. "Good morning, Mr. Edward," she greeted him on a rainy Tuesday in March, finding him in the kitchen preparing his own coffee. "Good morning, Mary. Up early today too?" "I always wake up at 5:30, she replied, starting to. He organized the utensils for his morning coffee. "I like to have time to pray a little before leaving home." Edward paused, the cup halfway to his lips. "What do you pray for?" Mary looked at him in surprise, as if she hadn't expected the question. "For the health of my family, for the work I have, for God to protect the kids at school." She hesitated. "And for you too." "For me? Of course." She said it as if it were obvious. "You give me honest work. You treat me with respect. It's natural for me to pray for God to bless you." The simple sincerity of her response completely disarmed him. When was the last time someone genuinely cared about his well-being without expecting anything in return? "Mary," he said impulsively, "would you like to have coffee with me? I mean, sit and talk a little." She blinked, clearly surprised. "Mr. Edward, that wouldn't be appropriate." "Why not? It's my house. You've worked here for 2 years. We can talk like normal people." After a moment's hesitation, Mary accepted a cup of coffee and sat at the edge of the chair, still visibly uncomfortable with the informality of the situation. "Tell me about your kids," Edward asked. Mary's face lit up immediately. "Tyler is in his sophomore year of high school. He wants to study mechanical engineering. He's as smart as his father was, responsible." She smiled with pride. "He works part-time at a shop near our home, saving money to help with college." "And the girl?" "Lily. 14 years old in 8th grade. She's an artist," Mary laughed. "She draws, paints, writes poetry, always with some project in her hands. Sometimes I worry because she's very dreamy, you know. The world can be too harsh for dreamers." Edward noticed the melancholy that passed through her eyes. "Were you a dreamer too?" "I was," the answer came softly. "I wanted to be a doctor. I studied hard, passed the entrance exam for the state university. But then I met John, fell head over heels in love, got pregnant with Tyler in my 3rd semester." She shrugged. "Life took another turn." "Do you regret it?" Mary considered the question carefully. "No. I loved my husband. I love my children. But sometimes I wonder how it would have been, you know, if I had finished medical school, if I had had other opportunities. And now, with your degree in business administration. It's a new beginning. At 45, it's not easy, but—" She smiled with determination. "My mother always says it's never too late to plant a tree." Edward studied her face, impressed by the resilience he saw there. "Mary, can I ask you a personal question?" "Sure." "Why haven't you remarried? A woman like you—" Mary blushed slightly. "A woman like me has 2 kids to raise, an elderly mother to care for, and works all day cleaning other people's houses. What man would want all that responsibility?" "An intelligent man," Edward replied without thinking. The silence that followed was charged with a tension neither of them expected. Mary quickly stood up, carrying the empty cup. "I need to start cleaning the living room," she murmured, avoiding eye contact with him. But Edward had seen the flush on her cheeks, the way she had been momentarily speechless. 2 weeks later, Edward faced another unexpected revelation. He had come home early from a cancelled meeting and heard voices coming from the service area. He approached discreetly and saw Mary on the phone, speaking in a low but urgent voice. "Mrs. Johnson, you need to take your blood pressure medication at 2 o'clock, not 3. I left a note stuck to the fridge. What do you mean you can't read? Where are your glasses?" "In the bathroom." "Mrs. Johnson, how many times have I told you to keep your glasses in the same place?" Edward noticed the infinite patience in Mary's voice, even dealing with what was clearly a difficult conversation. "Let me talk to Tyler." "Hi, my son. How was school today?" "That's great. Listen, can you help Grandma with her medication? Explain to her that it's important to take it on time. I know you have homework, but it's just 2 minutes. Thank you, my love." A kiss from Mum. When she hung up, Edward saw her lean against the wall for a moment, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. It was the first time he had seen her show fatigue. "Mary?" She turned, startled. "Mr. Edward, I didn't hear you come in." "Sorry, I was solving a problem at home." "Is your mother okay?" "She is. It's just that after the stroke last year, she sometimes gets confused about her medication times. But don't worry, it won't interfere with my work." Edward felt a pang of something he couldn't identify. Guilt? Admiration? "Mary, do you have any support? To take care of your mother, I mean." "I have my kids. They help a lot." "But who takes care of you?" The question caught her off guard. Mary looked at him with a vulnerable expression he had never seen before. I take care of myself, Mr. Edward. That's how things work." At the end of March, an incident in the company's recreational area revealed yet another facet of Mary's personality. Edward had decided to organize a gathering for the employees and their families, something Isabella considered unnecessary and expensive, but he insisted on doing. Mary arrived accompanied by 2 teenagers who were clearly her children. Tyler, tall and skinny like a pole, had the same intelligent eyes as his mother and a firm handshake when Edward introduced himself. Lily was all contained energy in a small body, with rebellious curls and a smile that lit up her face. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Edward," Tyler said politely. "My mum talks a lot about you." "I hope it's good things," Edward replied, curious. "Always," the boy confirmed. "She says you're fair and respectful, that not every boss treats employees like people." Edward looked at Mary, who seemed mortified by her son's frankness. "Tyler, you don't have to—" "Let him speak." "Excuse me, Edward," Mary interrupted, gently. "It's nice to know your honest opinion." The party was in full swing when some staff suggested an impromptu performance. To Edward's surprise, it was Mary who volunteered to organize a line dance, even though it was March. "Come on, it won't hurt. It's just for fun," she said, already handing out papers. "Who knows how to dance? Raise your hand." Edward watched in fascination as she transformed a group of shy employees into enthusiastic dancers. There was something magnetic about her leadership. She didn't command, she inspired. Within 20 minutes, half the office was dancing to the tunes of Frank Sinatra, laughing and having fun like Edward hadn't seen in years. "Mr. Edward, come dance with us," called Lily, reaching out her hand to him. "I don't know how to dance." "Mom will teach you," the girl shouted over the music. Before he could protest, Edward found himself in Mary's capable hands, who guided him through the basic steps with infinite patience. "Relax, Mr. Edward," she laughed as he stepped on his own foot. "Country dancing is like life. The more you worry about getting it right, the more you mess up. Just let your body feel the music." For a few minutes, Edward completely forgot he was the boss. He forgot about responsibilities, pending contracts, and social pressures. He was just there, trying not to trip over an extraordinary woman who laughed at his awkward steps without any malice. When the music ended, he realized all the employees were smiling, not the forced smiles of corporate parties, but genuine joy. "Thank you for the dance," Mary said, still breathless, her eyes shining with happiness. "Thank you," he replied, realizing he never wanted that moment to end. It was then he saw Isabella standing at the entrance of the hall, watching the scene with an expression that mixed disdain and something more dangerous. The mask was about to fall again, and this time Edward wouldn't be the only one tested. Chapter 4. Tensions running high. Isabella approached the group with a smile that Edward knew well, the same one she wore in business meetings when she was about to deliver a calculated blow. She was wearing a yellow Chanel blazer that drastically contrasted with the simple attire of the staff, her Louboutin heels echoing on the floor like a declaration of territory. "What's all this excitement?" she asked in a syrupy voice, but Edward caught the underlying coldness. "I thought this was a company gathering, not a country dance." The festive atmosphere instantly chilled. The employees exchanged uncomfortable glances, and Mary took a step back, automatically reverting to the respectful posture of a housekeeper. "We were just having a little fun," Edward explained, noticing how everyone's body language had changed with the arrival of his fiancée. Mary organized a performance to liven up the party. "How creative," Isabella said, her eyes scanning Mary from head to toe with barely concealed disdain. "Mary, right? The housekeeper of the estate." "Yes, ma'am," Mary replied quietly, clearly embarrassed. "It's interesting how some people feel comfortable taking bold initiatives," Isabella continued, her tone seemingly casual but laden with venom. "Edward, darling, we need to talk about the wedding preparations. The suppliers from the French Riviera called, and there are some urgent changes." Edward felt the manipulation in her statement. There was no urgency, just Isabella's desire to mark her territory and interrupt something she clearly disapproved of. "Can it wait a few minutes? The party isn't over yet." "Actually, it's better if we go now. Robert Stevens just arrived and wants to discuss the contract downtown. He only has half an hour free." Edward looked around. The joy had dissipated like smoke. The employees were returning to their formal conversations, and Mary was already discreetly collecting the makeshift sound equipment. "Of course," he murmured, frustrated. "Let's go." As they walked away, Edward heard Isabella comment to one of the director's wives, "It's amazing how some employees don't know their limits, don't you think? Edward is too kind sometimes." In the following days, Edward noticed a subtle but noticeable change in Mary's behavior. She had returned to the extreme formality of her early months of work, avoiding casual conversations and limiting herself to polite but distant greetings. There were no more shared coffees or spontaneous comments about family. A week after the gathering, Edward found her in the library, dusting the shelves with mechanical movements while studying a business accounting book propped on a shelf. "How's the course going?" he asked, trying to regain their previous closeness. "Fine, thank you, Mr. Edward," she replied without looking up from the book. "Mary, did something happen? You're different." She paused in her cleaning, her hands gripping the cloth tighter than necessary. "Nothing happened, sir. I just reflected on some things after the party." "What kind of things?" Mary finally met his gaze, and Edward saw in her eyes a sad determination that hadn't been there before. "About places, Mr. Edward. About where each person belongs. Your fiancé is right. Sometimes we forget the limits." Edward felt anger rising in his chest. "What limits? You are a hard-working, honest, intelligent person. You owe nothing to anyone." "I'm a housekeeper, Mr. Edward. A good housekeeper, but still a housekeeper. Your fiancée will be the lady of this estate, and I need to respect that." "And what if I say I don't agree with that view?" The silence that followed was charged with all the tension that had built up since the party. Mary looked at him with an expression that mixed sadness, resignation, and something he couldn't fully identify. "With all due respect, Mr. Edward, it doesn't matter if you agree or not. It's the reality." The situation deteriorated further when Isabella began to appear at the estate with increasing frequency, always with some excuse related to wedding preparations. Edward noticed she watched Mary with feline attention, like a predator studying a potential threat. On a Thursday in April, he came home and found Isabella in the kitchen, chatting with Mary in a tone. Isabella was saying, "I've always been very particular about cleanliness. I grew up in a house with very high standards. My mother always said that if you want something done right, you need to be specific about your expectations." "Of course, Mrs. Isabella," Mary replied politely. "If there's anything that isn't to your liking, please feel free to guide me. I'm glad you understand. For example, look at the arrangement of the glassware in the dining room. It looks nice, but I believe it could be more aligned. And the cushions on the living room sofa, I like them to be perfectly perpendicular, you know." Edward observed Mary nodding patiently as Isabella bombarded her with increasingly detailed and unnecessary instructions. It was a clear display of power, a subtle yet constant reminder of hierarchy. "Isabella," Edward interrupted, "can I speak with you in the office?" "Sure, darling. I was just getting to know our Mary better. It's important to have a good relationship with the staff, isn't it?" "Our Mary." Edward noted the implicit ownership in the statement. In the office, he confronted his fiancée directly. "What were you doing?" "Talking to the housekeeper. Why do you ask?" "You know exactly what you were doing, marking territory like an animal." Isabella laughed, but the sound was forced. "Edward, you're being paranoid. I just want our home to run perfectly when we get married. It's natural for me to have opinions on how things should be done." "Our home?" "Well, it will be ours after the wedding, won't it?" Edward studied his fiancée's face, searching for any sign of the woman he thought he had fallen in love with 2 years earlier. "Isabella, are you jealous of a housekeeper?" The question hit its mark. Isabella's eyes sparkled dangerously, and for a moment her mask of perfection slipped completely. "Jealous? Of a housekeeper from the countryside who barely finished high school?" Her voice rose an octave. "Edward, you're delusional." "Then why all this need to establish hierarchy?" "Because," Isabella said, partially regaining her composure, "some people need clear boundaries to remember their place. I've noticed how certain people feel too comfortable in this house." The veiled accusation hung in the air between them like a bomb about to explode. "What insinuation is that?" "No insinuation, darling, just an observation. Mary is friendly, perhaps too friendly for her own good." Edward felt his blood boil. "Explain that better." "There's nothing to explain. I just think a housekeeper who talks too much, who feels too comfortable organizing activities at company parties, who perhaps doesn't fully understand professional boundaries, can create Uncomfortable situations. Uncomfortable situations for whom? For everyone involved, Edward, including for herself. The threat was subtle, but clear. Edward understood that Isabella was declaring a silent war against Mary, using weapons he knew she wielded with mastery. Insinuations, social pressure, psychological manipulation. "Isabella," he said in a dangerously low voice, "Mary Grace is an exemplary employee who has worked here for 2 years. She deserves respect and will be treated with dignity in this house. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you rethink your priorities." "Of course she deserves respect," Isabella replied quickly, realizing she had gone too far. "I would never suggest otherwise. I just think we would all be more comfortable with well-defined boundaries for everyone's sake." But Edward had seen enough. Behind the mask of social concern, he recognized something much more primitive: fear. Isabella was afraid of losing something she considered her right. The question was, what exactly was she afraid of losing? Her status as the future lady of the estate? Or something much more fundamental that she might not even admit to herself? That night, alone in his room, Edward made a decision that would change the course of all his relationships. It was time to find out who the people around him really were, and this time, it would be Mary Grace who would be tested. Chapter 5. The heart test. Edward spent 3 sleepless nights planning the test. It wouldn't be anything dramatic like a fainting spell. This time, he needed something subtler, more revealing of Mary Grace's true character. The opportunity arose on a rainy Friday in April when he received a phone call that would change everything. "Mr. Edward?" The nervous voice of the doorman echoed through the intercom. "There's a lady down here who says she's Mary's mother. She seems a bit lost, sir." Edward frowned. Mrs. Johnson, Mary's mother, had never come to the estate. According to the reports he heard in phone conversations, the elderly woman rarely left her house since her stroke. "Send her up," he instructed, an idea beginning to form in his mind. 10 minutes later, a small, frail woman appeared at the front door, carrying a worn shopping bag and looking around with wide eyes as if she had never seen such luxury. She wore a simple floral dress and orthopedic shoes, her hands trembling slightly, a remnant of the stroke. "Are you the boss of my Mary?" she asked with a heavy accent from the countryside. "I am. Edward Miller. You must be Mrs. Johnson." "That's right, young man. Sorry to bother you, but I'm a bit lost. Mary left early today, said she was going to a meeting at the boys' school, but she forgot this." She showed him a vaccination card. "It's for the doctor this afternoon. It's important." Edward observed the genuine confusion in the elderly woman's eyes. "Do you want me to deliver it to her?" "I didn't want to trouble you, but—" Mrs. Johnson hesitated, clearly embarrassed. "I tried calling her cell, but I couldn't get through, and the address she gave me for the school, I think I wrote it down wrong because I couldn't find it." It was then that Edward realized the perfect opportunity for his test. "Mrs. Johnson, why don't you wait for Mary here? She should be back soon, and that way you won't have to wander around the city lost." "Oh, I can't impose like that. It's no trouble at all. Come, Please prepare some coffee." Edward accompanied Mrs. Johnson to the living room, observing how she reverently touched the expensive furniture, whispering, "Jesus, what a beautiful thing," upon seeing the paintings and glassware. She was a simple woman, clearly intimidated by the surroundings, but trying to maintain her dignity. "You're very kind to Mary, aren't you, young man?" she said, accepting a cup of coffee. "She always says her boss is a good person, different from the others she's worked for." "Has she worked for other difficult people?" "Oh, yes, she did," sighed Mrs. Johnson. "When she arrived in Los Angeles, she had some tough employers. One made her clean the whole house again if she found even a speck of dust anywhere. Another deducted from her salary if anything broke, even if it wasn't her fault. Edward felt anger imagining Mary being mistreated. And why didn't she leave those jobs? Need, you know, young man. A single woman with 2 kids and a sick mother can't afford to be picky. Mary always said, "Mom, as long as the work is honest and the paycheck comes in on time, I can endure any humiliation." The elderly woman's words revealed layers of Mary's personality that Edward had only suspected. Resilience, determination, silent sacrifice. "Mrs. Johnson," Edward said carefully, executing the first part of his test, "I need to ask you a favor. There's been an emergency at the company, and I need to leave urgently. Would you mind waiting for Mary alone? She should arrive in about 40 minutes. Alone here in this whole house?" Mrs. Johnson's eyes widened. "Oh, young man, I don't know if that's right. Don't worry. You can feel free to watch TV. Grab something from the kitchen if you want. I just ask that you don't touch the office. There are important documents in there." Edward watched her reaction closely. Mrs. Johnson nodded with the seriousness of someone receiving a sacred responsibility. "You can count on me, young man. I'll stay here quietly, not touching anything. Mary always taught me to respect other people's homes as if they were a church." Edward smiled, already anticipating the outcome of his test. "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. I'll be back soon." Edward didn't go anywhere. He drove to the end of the street and parked, waiting long enough to simulate a complete departure. Then he silently returned to the estate, entering through the side door that led directly to his office via a service corridor. From there, he could observe Mrs. Johnson without being seen. For 45 minutes, he witnessed a masterclass in integrity. Mrs. Johnson remained exactly where he had left her, in the living room, carefully flipping through a home decor magazine to avoid crumpling the pages. When she finished her coffee, she took the cup to the kitchen and washed it, drying it carefully before putting it back in the exact spot where she found it. At one point, she got up to go to the restroom, walking slowly through the corridors and clearly fascinated by the decor. Edward saw her stop in front of a painting, whispering, "Oh my, what a beautiful thing," but without touching the frame. The TV remained off. Mrs. Johnson didn't open any drawers, didn't touch any objects, and didn't investigate any room beyond the necessary route to the restroom. She simply waited with the patience of someone used to waiting, respecting every inch of the house that didn't belong to her. When Mary finally arrived, Edward heard their conversation through the ambient sound system. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Mary's voice mixed surprise and concern. "Oh, my daughter, you left this here." Mrs. Johnson showed the vaccination card. "And I couldn't find you." "Mom, you came here alone?" "How?" "By bus. I asked half the world until I found the right address. But what a beautiful place, Mary. It looks like a TV. Show mansion." Edward heard Mary sigh deeply. "Mum, you can't go out alone like this. What if you got lost? What if you felt unwell?" "I didn't, did I? And your boss is a sweetheart, dear. He welcomed me very well, even offered me coffee. He let me wait for you inside." There was a pause, and Edward imagined Mary processing the information. "He left you alone in his house." "He did. He said there was an emergency, but I could feel free. He even said I could grab food from the kitchen if I wanted." "And did you touch anything?" "Of course not, Mary. What kind of upbringing do you think I gave you? We respect other people's homes." Edward heard the relief in Mary's voice. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know you would never do anything wrong. It's just that it's a big responsibility to be alone in a house like this." "Daughter," Mrs. Johnson's voice became serious, "no matter how rich a man is, no matter how beautiful his house is, he is not worth more than our dignity. Your father taught me that, and I taught you. Money doesn't give the right to disrespect anyone, but it also doesn't give us the right to disrespect others." Edward felt a lump in his throat. There was the source of Mary's unwavering integrity, an upbringing based on mutual dignity, on respect that was independent of social class or financial condition. "Now let's go home. Your kids must be getting back from school," Mrs. Johnson continued, "and thank your boss for being so kind to an old lady like me." "I'll thank him, Mum. Mr. Edward is special." "Really? What do you mean by special?" There was a prolonged silence before Mary responded, and when she did, her voice was low, almost whispering. "It's hard to explain, Mom. He's different from the other bosses I've had. He treats us like people, not like furniture in the house." "Does that make you happy?" Another silence, longer this time. "It does," Mary finally admitted, "and that scares me." "Why does it scare you, dear?" Because some things aren't meant for us, Mom. And when we start dreaming of what we can't have, you're hurting yourself." Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of Mary Grace's words. She was protecting herself in the only way she knew, constantly reminding herself of her place in the world. When they both left, Edward remained in the office for a long time, processing everything he had discovered. The test revealed more than he expected, not only about Mary Grace's integrity and her family, but about the walls she had built around her heart, walls that he was increasingly determined to tear down. But first, he needed to face a truth he had been avoiding for months. He was in love with Mary Grace. And for the first time in his life, love was more frightening than any risky business deal he had ever undertaken. Continue 03 to 33, Chapter 6, When Secrets Come to Light. Edward spent the weekend tormented by revelations that piled up like pieces of a complex puzzle. The following Monday, he decided to take an action he had been postponing for weeks. Discreetly investigate Isabella's past, not out of paranoia, but from a growing need to understand who he was really about to marry. "Mark," he said on the phone to his personal attorney, "I need you to do a discreet background check. Nothing invasive, just public information about financial history, business." "About whom?" asked Mark Johnson, who had been handling Edward's legal matters for 15 years. "Isabella Carter, and while you're at it, check on her family's business situation, Carter Imports." "May I ask why?" Edward hesitated. Mark was more than a lawyer. He was a friend, one of the few he completely trusted. "I have a strange feeling, Mark. Little things that don't add up. Phone calls cut off when I get close. Excessive nervousness when we talk about finances." "I understand. How soon do you need it?" "A week?" "Done." While waiting for the report, Edward observed Mary Grace with completely different eyes. Every gesture of hers began to carry amplified meaning. The way she treated the household items as if they were personal treasures, her infinite patience when explaining a task to Marta, the new housekeeper he had recently hired, the discreet way she rearranged the flowers when they wilted, never mentioning the extra work. On Wednesday, an apparently trivial incident revealed yet another layer of Mary Grace's personality. Edward was in an important video conference with Japanese investors when the sound of glass breaking echoed through the house. He tried to stay focused on the meeting, but 10 minutes later, Mary Grace discreetly knocked on the office door. "Mr. Edward, I apologize for interrupting," she whispered, "but I need to talk to you about an accident." Edward excused himself from the video conference for a few minutes. "What happened?" Mary Grace looked mortified. "I broke the glass vase in the main room, the big one from the coffee table. I was cleaning and—" She took a deep breath. "I know it's very expensive. How much does it cost? I'll replace it, even if I have to pay in installments." Edward looked at her, hair tied in a simple bun, apron stained from the day's work, honest eyes filled with genuine concern for having damaged something that probably cost 3 times her monthly salary. Mary Grace, it was an accident. That doesn't matter, Mr. Edward. It was my responsibility to take care of the things in the house. I will replace it. And what if I say, I won't accept you paying? Mary Grace stared at him with a determination he recognized from her mother. Then I'll look for another job where they can deduct it from my salary until the debt is paid off. I won't accept charity. The moral strength of that statement hit him like a punch to the stomach. Here was a woman who would rather sacrifice herself than accept help she considered charity. Pride and integrity walked hand in her personality in a way that Edward had rarely found in his social circle. "All right," he said, an idea forming. "You can replace it, but I want you to choose the replacement yourself." "Sir?" "Go to some stores, see options, compare prices, bring me some suggestions. You can do this on your work hours. Consider it part of the job." Mary Grace nodded, clearly relieved to have found a dignified solution to the problem. On Friday, Mark called with the report that Edward both dreaded and anticipated. "Edward, you need to sit down to hear this." Edward closed the office door, ensuring total privacy. "Go ahead." "Carter Imports has been technically bankrupt for 8 months. They have debts of approximately $12 million with international suppliers, $3 million with the IRS, and another $2 million with private banks." Edward's stomach dropped. How can they be bankrupt? Isabella never mentioned financial problems, because she can't mention them. The family has been maintaining appearances with personal loans and gradually selling off assets. Their estate in Beverly Hills has 3 overlapping mortgages. And how long has this been going on? The problem started 2 years ago when a large shipment of French wines was rejected by the health department for irregularities. They lost $500,000 just on that operation. Since then, it's been a snowball effect. Edward did the mental math. 2 years, exactly when he had met Isabella at a charity event where she seemed the very image of business success. "Mark, is there anything else?" "There is, and you won't like it. Investigating the family's business connections, I found out that her partner, Mark Johnson, has a minority stake in a consulting firm that has provided services to Carter Imports in the last 6 months. Mark, his partner for 8 years, responsible for the commercial area of the construction company. A man Edward considered loyal, reliable. What kind of consulting? Officially, financial restructuring. Unofficially, well, it would be interesting to check if there's a conflict of interest there. Edward felt the world sway beneath his feet. "Mark, I want you to investigate everything about the relationship between Mark and the Carter family. All the details." "It's already being done." "Edward, there's a possibility that your marriage may be more strategic than romantic." After hanging up, Edward remained motionless for long minutes, processing the implications. Isabella wasn't simply interested in his money, she was desperate for it, and Mark was possibly part of a more elaborate plan. The confrontation with reality came sooner than Edward expected. That same afternoon he arrived home and found Isabella in the main room, speaking on the phone in a low, urgent voice. When she saw him, she quickly hung up. "Who was it?" Edward asked casually. "No one important. The florist. Confirming the arrangements for the church." Edward knew she was lying. The florist was an Italian lady who spoke English with a heavy accent, and the voice he had heard was male and clearly Brazilian. "Isabella, I need to ask you a direct question." "Sure, love." But Edward noticed the instant tension in her shoulders. "How is your family's business doing?" The question hit the mark. Isabella blinked rapidly, her expression wavering for a fraction of a second before she resumed her controlled smile. "Why the question?" "Curiosity. We haven't talked much about your family's business." "It's fine. Dad is cautious about expansion during the economic crisis, but nothing serious." Another lie. Edward tested. "That's good. I was wondering if you all would like to participate in the Westwood project. It could be an interesting partnership." Isabella's eyes sparkled with an intensity that confirmed all of Edward's suspicions. That would be wonderful. Dad would be very interested." "Great. I'll ask Mark to prepare a proposal." "Mark?" Her voice rose slightly. "Why specifically him? He handles the commercial side. Why?" "Nothing. It's just that—" "Well, couldn't you discuss this directly, among family?" Edward studied his fiancée's face, clearly seeing the discomfort at the mention of the partner. The pieces of the puzzle fit together with a chilling perfection. "Sure," he said, "we can do that." That night, alone in the office, Edward made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't confront Isabella yet. He needed more evidence. But he would start documenting carefully every conversation, every suspicious behavior. And for the first time, he allowed himself to seriously consider a question he had been avoiding for months. What if he cancelled the wedding? The answer came in the form of an image, Mary Grace smiling as she danced at the company party, her eyes shining with genuine joy, her warm hands guiding him through the steps of the dance. For the first time in his adult life, Edward Miller admitted to himself that he was in love with the wrong woman, or perhaps finally with the right woman. Continue 0334. Chapter 7. The Discovery That Changes Everything. The brown envelope arrived on a grey Monday in May, personally delivered by Robert Stevens with an expression Edward had never seen on the lawyer's face in 15 years of friendship. They met at the construction company's office, away from curious eyes and ears. "Edward, you need to prepare for what's in this report," Robert said, placing the envelope on the table with careful reverence. It's worse than we imagined." Edward opened the document and began to read. With each page, his expression darkened. Bank documents, property records, transaction history, everything painted a devastating picture of betrayal and manipulation. "Mark has a joint account with Isabella?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "Opened 6 months ago. There are regular transfers from his construction company to that account, always approved by him as performance bonuses." Edward continued reading. "And this apartment in Westwood? Purchased in her name but financed by him. The payments are made with money that technically comes from the profits of his company. The betrayal was systematic, elaborate, built over months with the precision of a business operation." Edward felt nausea rising in his stomach. "How long have they been involved?" "By the records, at least 8 months. But Edward—" Robert hesitated. "There's something more serious." "What?" "The Westwood project. Mark has already signed a pre-contract with the Carter family, promising a 40% share of the profits without your authorization." Edward closed his eyes, feeling the empire he had built, over 20 years being eaten away from within by people he trusted. How much money is involved? If the project is completed as planned, approximately $23 million, enough to save the Carter company and still leave Mark financially independent. Edward remained silent for long minutes, processing the magnitude of the betrayal. It wasn't just the money. It was the discovery that the 2 people closest to his personal and professional life had conspired against him for months. "Robert, I want you to prepare 2 documents. First, the termination of the partnership contract with Mark. Second—" He paused, the words coming out with difficulty. "Second, the cancellation of all wedding preparations." "Edward, are you sure? Maybe we should confront them first, give them the opportunity to explain." "Explain what?" "To tell me that the love I felt for 2 years was a charade, that every kiss, every promise, every intimate moment was calculated to rob me." The anger in Edward's voice was cold, controlled, more dangerous than any emotional explosion. "And there's a third thing I want you to investigate," he continued. Mary Grace, nurse, originally from Riverside, widowed, 2 kids. Robert frowned. The housekeeper? Why? Because, Edward said, surprising. Himself, with the clarity of his own answer, she may be the only honest person left in my life. That afternoon, Edward arrived home early, needing time to process everything alone before facing any confrontation. He found Mary in the library, organizing books with the meticulous care he had learned to admire. She was wearing a simple navy blue dress, not her work uniform, and her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders in a natural wave he had never noticed before. "Good afternoon, Mr. Edward. I didn't expect you so early." "I had some matters to resolve." He watched as she immediately straightened up, assuming her usual respectful posture. But he also noticed that she didn't rush to grab her apron or change clothes. "Mary, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, sir." "What would you do if you discovered that someone who has trusted you for years is betraying you?" The question caught her off guard. Mary paused in organizing the books, her eyes meeting his with an unusual intensity. "What kind of betrayal, Mr. Edward?" "Financial, emotional, complete." Mary considered the question carefully, as she always did before answering something important. I think first, I would cry a lot, then I would get angry, and then—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Then I would try to understand if the anger is for the betrayal itself or for my own blindness." The answer revealed an emotional maturity that Edward rarely found in his social circle. "And then I would forgive the person, but not the betrayal, and I would move on, wiser." "That simple?" Mary smiled sadly. "People hurt other people, Mr. Edward. Sometimes out of malice, sometimes out of desperation, sometimes out of weakness. Holding on to resentment only hurts us twice." Edward studied her face, impressed with the wisdom contained in those words. "Have you ever been betrayed?" "I have. Not in the way you might be thinking, but I have trusted people who didn't deserve it." "And how did you overcome it?" "By remembering that I was still the same whole person I was before. The betrayal didn't change who I was. It only revealed who they were." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meanings. Edward felt a connection with Mary that went far beyond the employer-employee relationship. It was mutual recognition, a deep understanding between two people who had been tested by life and maintained their integrity. "Mary," he said impulsively, "would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" She blinked, clearly surprised. "Mr. Edward, that wouldn't be appropriate," he finished. "Why not?" "Because—" Mary visibly struggled with the answer. "Because people have different places in life, and when those places mix, someone always gets hurt." "What if I say I don't care about places?" "I would say you should care, for the sake of both of us." Edward took a step toward her, noticing how Mary instinctively stepped back, but not out of fear. It was a self-preservation he was beginning to understand. "Mary, can I tell you a secret?" "If you want. In the past few months, you have become the only person in my life that I completely trust. The only person who shows they care about me as a person, not as a bank account." Mary closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, Edward saw contained tears. "Please, don't say that." "Why?" "Because," her voice faltered, "because some things we feel cannot be spoken, and when they are spoken they cannot be forgotten." Edward understood he was on the brink of something irreversible, a confession that would definitively change the dynamic between them. But the revelations of the day, Isabella's betrayal and Mark's, the loneliness of years, all converged to this moment. "What if I say I don't want to forget?" Mary looked directly at him, and for the first time since he met her, Edward saw pure vulnerability in her eyes. "Then I would say you are confusing gratitude with feeling, and that it will pass." "What if it doesn't pass?" "Then," she whispered, "we both will have to be very strong. Because some stories don't have a happy ending, Mr. Edward, no matter how much we want them to." In that moment, Edward knew he had fallen hopelessly in love with a woman who understood him better than he understood himself, but who had enough wisdom to protect them both from a situation she considered impossible. The problem was that for the first time in his life, Edward was willing to fight for the impossible, and he had much more power to change the circumstances than Mary imagined. Chapter 8. The inevitable confrontation. Edward spent the night awake, walking through the empty estate's hallways, like a haunted ghost. Mary's words echoed in his mind. Some stories don't have a happy ending. But for the first time in years, he felt he had found something worth fighting for, regardless of social conventions or others' expectations. The next morning, he decided it was time to face the truth head-on. He called Mark, requesting an urgent meeting, and Isabella suggesting a special lunch to discuss the final details of the wedding. Both readily accepted, unaware that Edward knew everything. The meeting with Mark was scheduled for 10 in the morning at the construction company's office. Edward arrived, 15 minutes early, carefully organizing the documents that Robert had prepared on the conference table. When Mark entered, a tall man in his 40s, with the confident smile of someone who believes they control the situation, Edward observed him as if he were seeing him for the first time. "Edward, what mysterious meeting is this?" Mark said, casually sitting in his usual armchair. "I hope it's about new projects. I have some interesting ideas to present." "I'm sure you do," Edward replied coldly, "especially about downtown." Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough to confirm Edward's suspicions. "Downtown? What about it?" Edward slid the documents across the table. "Can you explain these transfers to a joint account of yours with Isabella Carter?" Mark's face paled instantly. He looked at the papers without picking them up, as if they were snakes ready to strike. "Edward, I can explain. You can explain how my partner has been diverting company resources for 8 years to finance an apartment for my fiancée." "It's not exactly like that." "Not?" Edward stood up, his voice gaining a coldness that Mark recognized from the tensest negotiations. "Then explain how it is. Explain this contract you signed promising 40% of the project profits to the Carter family. Explain why my fiancée has been receiving regular transfers from our company for 6 months. Mark tried to maintain his composure, but his hands trembled slightly. "Edward, you don't understand the complete situation." "Then explain it to me," Edward said, crossing his arms. "Explain how the woman... 2 years ago, you told me you loved me, and now you're sleeping with my business partner. Explain how you two plan to use my marriage to save a failing company. Explain, Mark. I have time." The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Mark looked at his own hands, then back at Edward, and something in his expression surrendered. "It started as business," he said quietly. "Her family was desperate, in debt up to their necks. They approached me knowing I was your partner, wanting help to get close to you. And you accepted?" "At first, it was just financial consulting. Legitimate. But then..." Mark paused, struggling with the words. "Then I met Isabella in person." Edward felt nauseous. "And you fell in love?" "I don't know if it was love or opportunity. She's alluring, Edward, and smart, and she was willing to do anything to save her family. Anything, including marrying me." Mark nodded miserably. The plan was simple. She would marry you, secure access to your resources, and the three of us would come out ahead. You would have a beautiful wife from a good family, she would save the company, and I would get rich. And when did the personal relationship start? About 6 months ago. She said she was tired of pretending, that she needed someone who really wanted her. Edward laughed bitterly. And you believed she wanted you, not the money you were stealing from me. Mark lifted his eyes, and Edward saw a mix of shame and self-deception that almost provoked pity. I wanted to believe, Mark admitted. I wanted to believe that someone like her could be interested in someone like me. Someone like you, Edward repeated. You mean a thief? A traitor? A man who sold 15 years of friendship for a woman who doesn't even truly love him? The words hit Mark like physical slaps. He hunched his shoulders, suddenly looking much older. Edward, if you want, I can try to pay back the money. With what money, Mark? You spent it all financing a fantasy. So what do you want? Edward placed another document on the table. Your resignation, effective immediately, and the transfer of all your shares in the company to me for the symbolic amount of $1. Edward, this will leave me with nothing. You were already left with nothing, Edward replied coldly. You just didn't know it. Mark signed the documents with trembling hands, each signature a confession of guilt. When he finished, he stood up slowly. Edward, I know this means nothing now, but I'm sorry. I am too, Edward said without looking at him. I'm sorry for considering you a friend. Lunch with Isabella would be even more difficult. Edward met her at the Ivy, where she wore a red dress that cost more than what Mary earned in 3 months. She smiled radiantly when she saw him, kissing him on the cheek with the familiarity of 2 years of dating. Love. What a wonderful surprise this special lunch is. I'm dying of curiosity about what you want to discuss. Edward watched her play the role of the passionate fiancée and felt a deep sadness. Not for losing her, that he realized now was even a relief, but for the discovery that he had wasted 2 years of his life on an illusion. Isabella, he said after they placed their orders, I need to ask you some direct questions. Of course, love, about the wedding, about Mark. The fork stopped mid-air on its way to her mouth. Edward saw the exact moment she realized he knew. Mark? What kind of question? The kind that demands complete honesty. Isabella placed the fork on her plate, her expression gradually shifting, from feigned surprise to something more calculated. What did you find out? Everything, Edward said simply. Your family's failing company, the apartment in Westwood, the joint account, the fraudulent contracts, everything. Isabella remained silent for long moments, as if calculating her options. Finally she sighed. Since when do you know? A few weeks, but I suspected for months. And why didn't you confront me earlier? Edward studied her face, searching for any sign of remorse, of genuine regret. He found nothing but cold calculation. Because I still hoped I was wrong. Because, believe it or not, I really loved you. Loved? She repeated, catching the verb tense. I loved the person I thought you were, not the person you really are. Isabella leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since he met her, Edward saw her mask completely fall away. What remained was neither the sophisticated seductress nor the passionate fiancée, but a desperate woman tired of pretending. Edward, you don't understand the pressure I was under. My family losing everything, the company that's been ours for 3 generations about to close, my father depressed because he feels like a failure. And that justifies 2 years of lies. It justifies a woman doing what she can to survive in a world that doesn't give second chances. The brutal honesty of her response surprised him. And Mark, was that also survival? Isabella looked at her hands. Mark was complication. He fell in love with me, and I was so tired of pretending that I fell in love with him too. Or at least with the idea of someone who really wanted me, not just what I represented. And me? What did I represent to you? Security, she replied without hesitation. Stability. The chance to never have. To worry about money again. Never love. Isabella looked directly at him, and Edward saw an honesty she had never shown before. I liked you, Edward. I respected you. I admired what you built. But love, true love, no. And I think you never really loved me either. You loved the idea of me. The observation hit him with its precision. It was true. He had fallen for the perfect woman that Isabella represented, not for the complex and flawed person she truly was. So what do we do now? Edward asked. I think you've already decided, Isabella said, noticing the papers he had placed on the table. Cancellation of the wedding. Edward nodded. Among other things. Isabella quickly scanned the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. Are you going to sue me? No, but I want you and Mark to stay away from me and my company, completely. And what if I don't agree? Then the lawsuits start tomorrow morning, and believe me, I have the resources to make your life very difficult for the next few years. Isabella slowly nodded. So that's it. 2 years down the drain. Not down the drain, Edward corrected, standing up. It was 2 years of learning, for both of us. As she signed the papers, Edward felt a strange mix of relief and melancholy, not from losing her, but from the end of an illusion he had held on to for too long. Edward, Isabella said as he prepared to leave, can I give you unsolicited advice? Sure. Be truly happy this time. And when you find someone who really loves you, don't let social conventions get in the way. Life is too short to waste true love. Edward looked at her, surprised by the sincerity of her statement. Why are you saying this? Isabella smiled sadly. Because maybe in the end, I've learned something about myself in these 2 years too. Edward nodded and left the restaurant, feeling simultaneously free and terrified. Free from a life based on lies, and terrified by the possibility of finally having to fight for what he truly wanted. Mary Grace. Continue, Chapter 9. Revelations from the Past. Edward drove through the streets of Los Angeles aimlessly, processing the events of the morning. The betrayal of Mark and Isabella, though painful, had been almost a relief. It confirmed intuitions he had been ignoring for months. But now he faced an even more complex question: how to approach Mary without her interpreting his intentions as an abuse of power. It was then that he received the phone call that would change everything. Mr. Edward. Roberto's voice was tense. I need to meet with you urgently. It's about the investigation you requested regarding Mary Grace. I found something unexpected. What kind of thing? I'd rather discuss it in person. Can you come to my office now? An hour later, Edward was sitting across from Roberto, who spread a series of old documents across the table. Birth certificates, property records, handwritten family trees. Edward, you need to prepare for this, Roberto said, clearly uncomfortable. Mary Grace. Well, her maiden name was Silver. Silver, like half of California, so what? Silver from Riverside, California, daughter of John Silver and granddaughter of Joaquim Silver. Roberto paused dramatically. Joaquim Silver was a partner of your great-grandfather, Antonio Mendez, in founding the family's first construction company in 1943. Edward felt the world stop. What do you mean, partner? Roberto placed a yellow document on the table. Original partnership agreement of Mendez and Silver Construction, signed on March 15, 1943. 50% for each partner. That's impossible. My family always told me my great-grandfather started the company alone. Apparently not. Joaquim Silva contributed inherited land, while Antonio Mendez brought technical knowledge and some contacts. The company did well until 1951, when there was a disagreement over the direction of the business. Edward examined the documents with trembling hands. What kind of disagreement? Your great-grandfather wanted to expand to Los Angeles. Joaquim preferred to stay in California, to build more slowly. They had a serious falling out, and Antonio bought Joaquim's share for an amount that, according to the records, seems to have been well below the actual value of the assets. And then? Antonio moved to Los Angeles and built the empire you know. Joaquim stayed in Riverside with the remaining land, which wasn't much. The Silva family remained in agriculture and livestock, living a simple life. Edward felt dizzy. Roberto, are you telling me that Mary Grace is the great-granddaughter of your great-grandfather's original partner? That, technically, she has hereditary rights to part of your family's estate? The silence in the office was absolute. Edward reread the documents, searching for any flaw, any alternative explanation. He found none. How much is her share worth? Roberto did quick calculations. Considering the appreciation of the original assets over 70 years, conservatively, about $15 million. Edward rested his head in his hands. The woman who had worked as a housekeeper in his home for 2 years, who worried about replacing a broken vase, who studied business management at night to try for a better life. This woman was technically his distant cousin and the legitimate heir to a considerable fortune. Does she know about this? From what we've investigated, no. The Silva family lost most of their documents in a flood in 1987. Mary probably doesn't even know her grandfather was a businessman. And legally, statute of limitations is complicated in cases of family inheritance. A good lawyer could argue that the original sale was made for below market value, constituting injury. It would be a long fight, but she would have real chances. Edward stood up and walked to the window, watching the city's movement below. People coming and going, each carrying stories and secrets that intertwined in ways they could never imagine. Roberto, I want you to keep this information absolutely confidential. No one else can know about this. Of course. But Edward, are you going to tell her? The question echoed in Edward's mind all the way home. How to tell Mary that she didn't need to work as a housekeeper, that she didn't have to worry about her children's future, that her family had been robbed of an inheritance 70 years ago, and how to do it without it seeming like an attempt to buy her. Edward found Mary in the service area, folding clothes with the meticulous precision that characterized everything she did. She was softly humming a country song, lost in her own thoughts. Mary! She turned, surprised. Mr. Edward, I didn't hear you come in. Is something wrong? You look troubled. The genuine concern in her voice almost broke him. As always, Mary sensed his emotional state before he even thought about it. Mary took a deep breath. Can we talk? It's important. Of course. Let me finish up here. No, Mary, now, and please have a seat. Something in his tone must have communicated the seriousness of the moment, because Mary immediately dropped the clothes and sat in a nearby chair. I'm going to ask you some questions about your family, Edward began, and then I'm going to tell you something that will change your life. Mary blinked, clearly nervous. What kind of questions? Your grandfather, John Smith. What do you know about him? My grandfather. Mary seemed surprised by the question. He died when I was little, but I remember a bit. He was a good man, hard-working. He had some land in Riverside. What kind of land? Cattle, mainly. A bit of farming. Why the question, Mr. Edward? Edward took a deep breath. Mary, your grandfather wasn't just a cattle rancher. He was a businessman, a partner in a construction company. Construction company. Mary laughed nervously. Mr. Edward, I think you're mistaken. My grandfather was a simple man from the countryside. He never left California in his life. Edward showed her the documents that Robert had prepared. These are original contracts from 1943. Miller and Smith Constructions, 50% for John Smith, 50% for Anthony Miller. Mary looked at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Anthony Miller, like your great-grandfather. Exactly like my great-grandfather. She read the documents slowly, her expression gradually changing from confusion to something close to shock. Does this mean that we are distant cousins, and that your family has rights to part of the estate that was built? Mary abruptly stood up, as if the chair had caught fire. No, this can't be right. It is right, Mary. I checked everything. But my grandfather died poor. We sold his land to pay debts. If he was a partner in a company, he was robbed, Edward said simply. My great-grandfather bought his share for much less than it was worth, and then built an empire based on that original partnership. Mary began to pace back and forth like a caged animal. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth. And why are you telling me now, just now, after... She paused, seeming to realize something. After you cancelled the wedding? Edward was taken aback. How do you know I cancelled? Mr. Edward, I've worked in this house for 2 years. I know when you have a meeting with your lawyer. I know when you're angry. I know when you're sad. And today you were both. Her perception, as always, was frighteningly accurate. Yes, I cancelled the wedding. I found out I was being deceived. Mary stopped pacing and looked him directly in the eye. And now you want to tell me about inheritances and family? How convenient. The sarcastic tone surprised him. He had never seen Mary like this, defensive, almost hostile. Mary, it's not what you think. Oh, really? Then what is it? You discover that the housekeeper has a right to his money, that we are family, and decide to be generous. Want to give me a little allowance so I can keep cleaning your house in peace. Mary! No! She interrupted, her voice rising. I won't accept charity disguised as historical justice. I won't accept crumbs from the table of someone who robbed my family. The anger in her eyes was real, and Edward realized he had miscalculated her reaction. You're not understanding. I understand perfectly. The rich man feels guilty and wants to ease his conscience by giving money to the poor maid. Very nice, very noble. Mary, stop! Edward's voice came out harsher than he intended. You're being unfair. Unfair? She laughed bitterly. My family worked for 70 years thinking they were poor due to incompetence when they were actually robbed. And now you come to tell me that I'm unfair? Edward realized he had made a terrible mistake. He should have prepared better for the conversation. He should have considered how Mary would react to such a destructive revelation about everything she believed about her family. Mary, please sit down. Let me explain properly. I don't want an explanation. I want you to tell me one thing. If you hadn't cancelled the wedding today, would you still have told me this? The question caught him off guard, because the honest answer was, probably not. The silence was enough of an answer for Mary. That's what I thought, she said, taking off her apron. I'm resigning, Mr. Edward, effective immediately. Mary, don't do this. I can't work for you anymore. Not after this. I can't look at your face every day knowing that your family destroyed mine, and that you only told me this because... She paused, her eyes shining with contained tears. Because what? Because now you want to clear your conscience so you can have me without guilt. The accusation hit him like a bullet to the chest. That's not true. No. Then why did you tell me this today, Edward? Why today of all days? It was the first time She called him by his name, and the sound was heavy with pain and disappointment. Edward had no answer, because she was right. He had told her about the inheritance only after getting rid of Isabella, only after realizing he wanted Mary for himself. Mary, But she was already leaving, carrying only her bag, leaving behind 2 years of work, and Edward realized with growing horror any chance of a true relationship between them. The door closed with a definitive click, and for the first time in his life, Edward Miller felt truly alone. Continue, 0342. Chapter 10. The Abyss. And the decision. Edward remained motionless in the service area for long minutes after Mary left, surrounded by the deafening silence of the empty estate. The clothes she had been folding remained half done, abandoned like a painful symbol of how he had destroyed everything with his lack of tact and terrible timing. In the following 3 days, Edward discovered what true loneliness meant. The estate, once a refuge, became a mausoleum of lost opportunities. He hired a temporary cleaning company, but the efficient workers and the impersonal surroundings only highlighted the absence of Mary's warm presence. On Wednesday, Robert showed up unannounced, finding Edward in the office surrounded by work papers that he clearly wasn't managing to process. "You look like a zombie," Robert remarked, sitting down without an invitation. "Thanks for the compliment." "Edward, what happened? On Monday you were determined to sort everything out. Today it looks like the world has ended." Edward recounted the disastrous conversation with Mary, her furious reaction, and the sudden dismissal. Robert listened in silence, nodding occasionally. "You really told her about the inheritance on the same day you ended the engagement?" Robert asked when Edward finished. "Yes." "And you didn't realize how that would sound to her?" Edward looked at him miserably. "At the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. Honesty, transparency. Timing, Edward. Timing is everything. You came off as a man who dumped his fiancée and immediately tried to buy the housekeeper he wanted. That's not what happened, but that's how she interpreted it, and considering the power imbalance between you two, I can't blame her." Edward rested his head in his hands. "I messed everything up, Robert. The only genuine person I've met in years, and I pushed her away with my stupidity." "Maybe it's not. Too late. She made it clear that she doesn't want anything to do with me anymore." Robert leaned forward. "Edward, can I ask you something? Do you love this woman?" The question hung in the air like a confession demanding an answer. Edward had avoided formulating it clearly, even to himself, but now there was no escape. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "I think so. More than I've loved anyone else." "Then go after her." "How? She doesn't want to see me. She probably changed her number." "Edward, you built an empire from scratch. You took down competitors, secured impossible contracts, survived 3 economic recessions, and you're going to give up fighting for the woman you love over a misunderstanding?" Robert's words echoed in Edward's mind for the rest of the day. Perhaps there was a way to fix what he had broken. But first, he needed to understand exactly what had shattered. Edward spent the weekend discreetly investigating where Mary lived, discovering that she resided in a housing complex in East Los Angeles, over an hour from the estate. On Sunday morning, he gathered his courage and drove over there. The contrast with Beverly Hills was brutal. Simple apartment buildings, narrow streets, old cars parked wherever there was space, but there was life there. Children playing in the street, neighbors chatting from their windows, the sound of country music coming from various directions. Edward parked in front of the building where Mary lived and watched, too afraid to go up. It was Sunday morning, and he could see families preparing to go out, probably to church. He felt completely out of place, an intruder in a world where he didn't belong. Then he saw Mary come out of the building, accompanied by an elderly woman he recognized as Mrs. Johnson, and 2 teenagers who must have been her kids. She wore a simple navy blue dress, the same one she had on the day of the revelation, and carried a small Bible. Edward watched the family walk down the street, Mary offering her arm to the elderly mother, chatting animatedly with her children. There was a harmony there, a palpable love that made him question what he really had to offer a woman who already possessed so much emotional wealth. When they disappeared around the corner, Edward remained in the car for a few more minutes, battling the inner voice telling him to leave and let her be. Maybe she was right. Maybe some stories really didn't have a happy ending. But then he remembered her words in the library. Because some things we feel can't be spoken, and when they are spoken, they can't be forgotten. She had felt something for him too. Edward was sure of it. The question was whether there was still anything left to save. On Monday, Edward made a radical decision. Instead of trying to approach Mary directly, he would demonstrate his intentions through actions, not words. He called Robert and instructed, "I want you to prepare all the necessary documents to transfer to Mary Grace the part of the inheritance that belongs to her. 15 million, plus compounded interest for 70 years, plus compensation for emotional damages to the family. 25 million in total. Edward, are you sure? That's a huge amount. It's what's fair, and I want it done without my name appearing anywhere, as if it were a court discovery, an automatic process from the judicial system. That's going to be complicated. You're the best lawyer I know, Robert. If anyone can make it seem natural, it's you. And what if she finds out it came from you? Then at least I'll know I tried to do the right thing, regardless of what she decides about us." 3 weeks later, Robert called with news. "It's done. Mary received the official notification about the inheritance today. As a court discovery from the California Court of Justice, a routine investigation of unclaimed inheritances." How did she react? According to the process server who delivered the papers, she fainted. Literally. The kids had to call neighbors for help. Edward felt a pang of guilt. And now she's officially rich, independent. She can choose any life she wants, including a life away from me. Yes, including that. Edward hung up the phone and walked to the office window, watching the city's hustle and bustle. He had done what he believed was right, but now he faced a possibility he hadn't fully considered. What if Mary decided to use her newfound financial freedom to move far away from Los Angeles and from him? For 3 days, Edward resisted the temptation to seek her out or investigate what she was doing with the information about the inheritance. If he truly loved her, he needed to respect her space to process this monumental change in her life. On Thursday night, the doorbell of the estate rang. Edward opened the door and Mary found Edward standing there, holding a large envelope with an expression that mixed determination and nervousness. "Good evening, Edward," she said, and the sound of his name on her lips made his heart race. "Mary." He tried to keep his voice steady. "Please, come in." She hesitated for a moment, then crossed the threshold for the first time as a visitor, not as an employee. "We need to talk," she said, and Edward knew that his life was about to change again. For better or for worse, he would finally discover if true love was enough to overcome class differences, past misunderstandings, and the weight of family secrets kept for 70 years.